So we wanted to have a short discussion because, you know, we're having these global cooling pledge focal point meeting back to back with the June SPs. And we want to explore how we can make sure cooling is in the discussions in the next 2 weeks with His Excellency Adalberto from Brazil, and of course Martin, our Climate Change Director at UNEP. So I'm just going to have a bit of an informal fireside chat here on this. And I think my first question is, you know, how can the countries here who have come from all over the world to participate in the global focal point meeting then leverage the June sessions to really, and COP30 of course, to connect climate, to connect cooling into these discussions over the next 2 weeks? Maybe first to you.
For me? Okay. Well, I think each country, of course, has its own agenda, especially when we talk about the indicators for adaptation. You know, we have different realities. For Brazil, nature-based solution definitely became a really important topic. We are facing a lot of really difficult extreme weather events that are affecting most of the vulnerable ones. For example, we've seen all the efforts of São Paulo, and São Paulo has only 15% of the city in what we would call favela, the illegal, like the lower income communities. But a city like Belém, where COP30 is located, 53% of the city has, you know, informal communities. So every time you have the informal communities, normally you don't have sewage, you don't have water, you don't have, you know, so it's much difficult to talk about adaptation from these cities than the others. So for us, it's very important that the indicators that the adaptation negotiation brings can also foster a future approach to the funding and financing gaps. We all know that in Baku, there was an expectation. Of course, we had the lost and damage fund, which was a good news, but there was an expectation that we would get closer to the 1.3 trillion, but at the end, we were much closer to the 300 billion figure. So I think it's important as we debate adaptation and the indicators that the cities will do it, we have somehow a clear vision of how nature-based solution will be there, how the passive cooling will be there, how all the cooling areas that we are debating could be translated into the official negotiations so that each of our countries can, you know, lobby and fight for their position, but at the same time attach this debate to the roadmap Baku-Belém on financing, which for us will be crucial also to further debate throughout the COP30 presidency.
Thank you. Very concrete action points. So the Baku-Belém roadmap on finance in particular is one area, and also in the adaptation work program and discussions, I guess, on the global goal to make sure we're carrying forward the discussions we're having here on cooling. So thank you for that. Maybe I can hand over to you, Martin, on your reflections of how, as a community, the cooling can continue to be part of the discussions over the next 2 weeks.
Yes, thank you. You know, the Brazilian presidency for the COP has emphasized repeatedly that it is time after 3 decades of pledging and talking and framing that we move to implementation. Now, you know, we have done a lot in analyzing the issues, and we have some guidance on how to integrate cooling activities into the NDCs, for example. You know, somebody has said that 80% of what is being planned never gets implemented, and 80% of what is really happening was never planned. If you reflect on that, my point here is maybe it's time that we shift our efforts from, instead of coming up with the most perfect plans towards, shifting our energy and our collective efforts towards making things happen on the ground. Now, what I've been missing so far in this discussion here today, and looking at trying to answer your question here, Lily, is how can we better involve the private sector, the corporate sector, and not only the financial sector in terms of leveraging money, but give you one example, the air conditioner manufacturing companies. How many are there globally? It's a global business. Maybe there are a dozen big companies who manufacture air conditioners. And we know from what Fatih Birol has said yesterday in the conference in Brussels, and I've been there in the morning session, the executive director of the International Energy Agency, right? He said the driver for electricity at a global scale is not the data centers, for artificial intelligence and so on. It is air conditioning because of what we are discussing here, because of the heat stress that we have in urban areas, right? So if you think about that, how can we better incorporate the corporate sector, the manufacturing companies, and to work with them to use our platform here, that we have here, to bring them into the dialogue and to say, hey, can we apply not only at a national level the maps, the famous maps, to make those units more energy efficient, but can we work directly with the manufacturer to bring down their level of electricity consumption that the units are demanding, and with that we would have down the line a big win. So my point here that I'm trying to make is let's broaden this discussion and bring in industry and work with them.
Thank you, Martin, for the call to action. And I think next week we have many stakeholders here indeed. It's the governments, but also many different non-state actors that can be brought into the discussions, as you are saying, to see how to move. And of course, with the Global Cooling Pledge, 80 non-state actors signed, including many of those big manufacturers. So it is a question how we bring in better the private sector around the table, and it is a question that many countries have posed, and it is maybe something that we can discuss a bit further in this group together. So thank you for that. If I can, I don't know if you have any reflections on the point about engaging with the private sector, because I know you're very good in engaging all non-state actors and taking the agenda forward on cooling. I just wanted to see if maybe you had any reflections on Martin's intervention.
Yeah, we are also planning for the action agenda, COP30, to have specific places where the private sector would showcase the implementation of actions that they have been doing throughout the 6 major groups of the GST. So in our case, for example, Brazil had a very small climate financing environment. So in the beginning of the government, when President Lula and Minister Marina were back in 2023, we issued these green bonds, so $2 billion of green bonds, and we put all this money at the climate fund. And initially, the money went to fund the private sector. So we created all the priority areas. So we had, let's say, 200 million reais, which, divide by 6, very little, like 50 million in average per year of funding. And suddenly we got 10 billion. So of course the private sector, because of the funding, they also came and engaged and did a lot of things. So now we issue more 1 billion, and now this money, the second phase of the money is going to cities, where we also changed the sustainable construction, nature-based solution and things. So it's much harder because cities, you also have to help them to do the projects. Not only having the money there, the private sector does its own project and do it, but cities, you need to help them to do the projects. So I think that we aim that the private sector will have a very strategic role on COP30 to show that even if one or two national countries don't do too much, at the end, this matters very little because most of the emissions are in the hands of subnational governments and the private sector. And these projects will continue independently on what's going on.
But I think just to add one thing, a reflection that we heard earlier today as well, is that the market needs to be created with the demand pool, you know, and the public procurement, for example, which is something that everybody around the table here has committed to do as part of the Global Cooling Pledge nationally. That is something that is a very powerful lever at the national and subnational scale, both, to really create that market and deploy the technology. So I think that's just a moment of reflection in building partnerships with the non-state actors on the public procurement.
Yes, and if I may add something to this, one way of stimulating the demand is, of course, that we come up with blended financing instruments, and we are doing this. The EPIC, you know, is one of them, but it is, you know, it's hopefully it will be built up, you know, to something very big. But we need to be creative on that front with the blended financing instruments. And you know, one other idea is, you know, we are going into the SB now, and we are going into COP, and the UNFCCC has financial instruments. We have the Global Environment Facility, we have the Green Climate Fund, we have a number of other vertical funds, such as the Adaptation Fund. Why can we not, as part of this coalition and this movement and the momentum that we have here in this room, why can we not approach the leadership of the GCF, the GEF, and say, can you create a dedicated funding window for cooling to be part of a blended financing landscape of different instruments, you know, to accelerate the investment and to create that demand? Can we do that? Do we have a mandate to do that at the highest level, to speak to the CEOs, you know, of these two big vertical funds that have been created under the UNFCCC?
Would you like to come in on that?
Yeah, no, I think it definitely makes sense. You know, that's what we have to do. Also, when the climate fund in Brazil started to use, we created this ECO fund, which is a blended finance also from the climate fund. Then we made a bid for banks that could leverage minimum 6 times the money we added. So we gave for 1% interest rates, which is really low in Brazil, for the banks to have a blended finance 6 times more to finance the private sector. It started with renewable, then you went to methane capture on the landfill, you went to energy efficiency appliance, so you create all the lines of products, and because this climate fund money was used to pay the interest rates difference, they were able to leverage 6.5 times the money that was there. So it was 1 billion, then it became 6.5 billion in funding. So I think it's a great approach. You know?
But I think what I'm hearing between both of you is that really we need to, I mean, you mentioned the Belém, you know, finance roadmap, Baku Belém finance roadmap. You've mentioned the conventions and using GEF, GCF. I think the point is, it seems the focus is very much on finance and bringing in the cooling discussion into the finance space, because cooling is quite advanced, isn't it? I mean, it sounds like when we're sitting here, it's not at the level of we need to develop the technology or we need to even develop the best practice policies, because we know what those are, and many of you here are doing them, right? It's actually, and I think some countries said that today. I think it was, maybe it was Grenada who said that earlier, but that actually where things really need to move is on the finance. So it seems that that's maybe a very important entry point for the discussions in the June SBs next week that I'm hearing from both of you, and that I heard echoed in the discussions today. I was on a strict time. I think we have still 5 minutes left, if my colleagues can tell me. Yes? Okay, I got a thumbs up. So I can move to a question maybe also on the NDCs to you, Martin. First, perhaps, I mean, we know we have this drive also towards Belém on submitting enhanced NDCs, and of course the timeline for submission was extended. So we have an opportunity there to, deliver these strong, let's say, blueprints for action on climate. How do you think that cooling can help countries here raise ambition in their NDCs?
The NDCs, in my view, are important in the sense that they elevate certain issues that countries want to take action on. Before any action, it's important to have the awareness and the public and political support for the action. And the NDC, ideally, is exactly that platform at the national level where you discuss and prioritize what are the actions that the country should take both on mitigation and on adaptation. And if in your NDC, cooling in all its aspects, right, and we have discussed this today, it cuts across mitigation and adaptation and equipment and energy and all these things, right? But if cooling in the NDCs can be elevated, it draws attention. With attention comes public and political support for action. And that, in my view, is what we can do, or what collectively here, to bring cooling as a topic into the NDCs as a prerequisite, in a way, for galvanizing that action that we want to see. So it is an important element. But remember what I also said at the very beginning, planning and good planning is only gets us only so far, right? And because many of the things that are written down in a plan, then they disappear in a drawer somewhere in an office, and nobody looks at it again, and it gets never implemented. So that's what we need to avoid, right? And we can avoid that by not only relying on creating a plan, a perfect plan where cooling is integrated and so on, but to, in parallel and at the same time, already talk to the industry, to the financial institution, and take action, and not wait, for a plan to materialize itself somehow.
Thank you. And I don't know if you wanted to also, I know that Brazil has also elevated cooling and also the HFCs into its NDCs. I don't know if you wanted to share any reflections on that.
Well, I think it's very important that the NDCs as a whole, they reflect an economy-wide NDC. Brazil was, I think, one of the first developing countries to have it, have all the gases. Of course, like methane we see in some, but there are other gases that short-life climate pollutants that are not there. Let's see, for example, the example of China. Just China adding methane is more emission than Brazil. And we are, I think, number 6 or 7 in the world of emissions. So you see how important it is. But having in the NDCs gives this political support to the topic. But we try to attach the NDC also with the climate mitigation implementation plan. Because for us also you have the commitment, we put the targets on a city level, but we also wanted to see this reflected in the new updated climate mitigation action plan, where we allocated the emissions per sector with all the different gases. And then you allow the sectors to kind of, debate among themselves. We also approved last year a carbon credit market for Brazil, an official one, that each sector, depending on the size of emission, you have to trade with other sectors inside the country so that you can have probably a better allocation of the funding. But at the same time, we felt it was important to do what we call the green taxonomy, of our sectors. So we did green taxonomy for agriculture, energy, waste, all the different areas, so that we can help the financial sector to know which are the projects that are considered green, So the green taxonomy helped us as we debated with different stakeholders. This is a good project, this probably not. So then you help the private sector and the financing world also to allocate better their resources to say, okay, there's NDC, there's the climate plan, this is what society agree as the green taxonomy. We are finishing still, didn't approve, but it's on the last weeks to approve it. Then it's easier for the private sector to say, okay, I will shift my investment from here to there. Then it's a better way to kind of integrate the NDC, the planning, the action plan together to where the finance world will go.
So I think, yes, I mean, the NDC clearly creates that political signal also for the market to respond, as you were saying. And I think that, seeing that as UNEP, we're also working with the World Bank to create an investment guideline. So you can translate the NDC for cooling into investment plans, investment roadmaps. So hopefully that is also helps in moving things from plan to action or implementation. I think one final question is, in the discussions, we hear a lot right now, as you've highlighted several times today, a big focus on extreme heat. We've heard that from a lot of speakers and, rising temperatures. Even in Germany, they're facing extreme heat, which I find amazing. I know even in the UK or in Manchester, they have a heat plan, which I find quite amazing, I have to say. Being from Canada, also there, I see that people are facing now heat. It's just funny. So I'd like to just think, how do you think the global cooling pledge, the work that's happening in this room on cooling at the national scale, the local scale, how is that helping advance our agenda on extreme heat in the climate discussions?
Well, I think historically we lacked a lot the capacity to communicate with society and population, the impact and the reality of climate change on their lives. The Amazon region in Brazil has been electing far-right governments for the last years. All the governors, a lot of the except Belém and Pará, most of the other states at the Amazon, they elect far-right governments which are not committed to the environment, because we were never able to explain very well to society the importance of having the forest standing up, and the value of the forest standing up. That's why we are doing our national bioeconomy strategy and the national policy on bioeconomy to show that, the forest can give much more benefits to society than if you cut it off. So I think urban heat and some of these extreme weather events, these are something that people easily understand, So when we attach the debate on cooling, passive cooling, nature-based solution, urban trees, people can understand it easier. Last year, for example, Brazil had 3 big waves of urban heats at the middle, in summer, but also after summer. And in Brasilia was really dry. We got to around 7 and 8% humidity. I don't know if you have ever been to a place like this, with 7% humidity. The Sahara Desert is 20, okay? So Brasilia was less than 10. It was very difficult to breathe, You would feel it hard. But I remember that weekend, they told people, don't get outside. And it was like a weekend. You have kids, of course, you want to get out your house. You're not going to get out of your house during the weekend. But they told us, please stay home. This is going to be difficult. Then in my apartment, I live in this governmental building, that there's some governmental buildings. So I live in one of those apartments. It's full of trees everywhere. It's on the 6th floor, but the view of my apartment is beautiful. It's only like trees, trees and birds and I was there without turning on the air conditioning. And I didn't feel the urban heat. that urban heat island. So they were talking on TV, don't go out, it's so, you know, it's dry, it's gonna be burning out if you go out by yourself. And we were inside the house with all those trees around, and I didn't feel it. And I remember I said, well, I'm in Brasilia, it's having this huge wave of urban heat, and I'm not feeling it. It was then when we realized how important it is to have the urban tree, the passive cooling, the nature-based solution, and this and that. So I think this is the challenging part. And Cooling Coalition can help us to translate this difficult climate debate, these difficult terms that we talk here that, you know, society doesn't understand, that this impacts people's life on the daily basis, on the heat, on the landslides, on the floods, on the draws. So I think this is one of the best parts of the coalition that has been helping us to translate these debates to normal people's life.
Thank you, Adalberto. No, I'd like to hear your reflections.
Can I add to that? I mean, without repeating what Adalberto has said, because that is, in a way, exactly what I wanted to say on this particular topic, but just to rephrase it, I mean, climate, over the last 30 years, we talk about climate change, and it's, for many people, except for those maybe here in the room, and then, you know, at our meetings, our climate meetings, climate is an abstract topic that you can't see. You know, greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, what is that? You can't even touch it, you can't see it. You know, it's invisible. And so cooling and extreme heat, and what you just explained to us here, is it brings it home, makes it real. And that is what we can bring as the Cool Coalition and as this movement to the SB, to the COP, and to the public discourse. Secondly, climate was always and has been and still is often associated with a kind of, how should I say, with a doomsday scenario, a negative message that is associated with, you know, net zero, decarbonize. It's all kind of, if you look at the terminology that we are using, it's all kind of negative. And people are saturated, you know, in listening to that. They don't want to hear that anymore. That is why climate has kind of also gone down, you know, from being on the top spot of international priorities to, I don't know where it is right now, but it's not in the top spots anymore, right? Because you cannot listen for 30 years, you know, to a doomsday narrative. And so we need to use this cooling and this heat topic to change that narrative, to translate it into a positive one, such as action on cooling is good for your health, for elderly people, for people vulnerable, you know, to extreme heat. It's good for your health. Or action on cooling in certain equipments and value chains of, and I mentioned that before, air-conditioned factories, refrigerators, is good for your business. Innovation, technological innovation, employment can be created, and a positive narrative and message that can easily grow out of the work that we are doing here in this Cool Coalition. And that, I think, is something unique and important.
Thank you so much for your reflections. I think, I hope that it's been inspiring, because it's certainly inspiring to me, but I'm very passionate about it. So I'm happy to hear also both of you, who are very busy working on many topics, speak so passionately as well about it, because it is something that's affecting us on an everyday basis, which is what you're saying we need to highlight. And before we close, I wanted to actually give an opportunity to the audience, because I think it's a very rich discussion, and you will all be continuing in these discussions over the next 2 weeks, or some of you will be. If there's anything that you would like to raise, either as input or as questions to this discussion before we wrap up this session. And please feel free to just raise your flag or otherwise. I would be really happy if somebody comes in, because I know many of you have very good ideas. So great. Thank you so much, my friend from Grenada. Over to you.
Thank you, Madam Convener. I'm so obliged to take up your request. I just want to harp on a very important point that was made by Martin with regards to getting cooling within the NDCs. And I want to even stress further, we need to get cooling on the climate agenda. Under the Montreal Protocol, there's a very well documented success story of what has been done in the cooling sector and how the Montreal Protocol by itself have averted more greenhouse gas emissions than the Kyoto or Paris Agreement. And so there's a blueprint already there for that. But under the Montreal Protocol, we consider ourselves to be unsung heroes in the sense that we have solved a climate issue or an environmental issue, but the emphasis has never been on the Montreal Protocol. It has always been on the COP. How many people are familiar with the MOP? There's a MOP for the Montreal Protocol, but does it attract the same level of significance as a COP? But when we compare the successes of the two treaties, it's chalk and cheese. So the point I'm trying to make is that we definitely need to get cooling. We understand, we see all the numbers. The Kigali Amendment can avert or can reduce 0.5 degrees Celsius by the end of the century. We see what's happening now, it's increasing. We're above 1.5 already. 60%, we have some numbers now, 60% by 2060. So the cooling sector has a huge mitigation potential from two fronts, from the direct emissions and the indirect emissions. The direct emissions alone can get 0.5 degrees reduction in atmospheric temperature. When we put energy efficiency with that, it's even more because in most cases the ratio is 80 to 20% in terms of direct and indirect emissions reduction. So there's a huge mitigation potential that we need to get cooling on the agenda of the climate people. And that is going to help us solve this issue even faster than we're thinking about. And I just wanted to strengthen the point that you were making, Martin.
No, I mean, just to say thank you so much. I don't know if you wanted to respond, but I also wanted to, in this vein, actually thank, one of our co-hosts, Moritz, who actually, and our colleagues from GIZ in Germany, just basically for hosting this meeting here, because, I think it is amazing that sometimes the negotiators in the discussions may not be speaking about the topic that we're talking about today. And so it's a bit what you're saying, that there's sometimes a disconnect because, obviously they're covering many topics, but how can we bring that together, which is essentially what we're trying to discuss here, is how can we make sure that the discussion we're having here is translated by the delegations over the next 2 weeks. And thank you also to, Brazil for, as a COP presidency, always giving their strength, elevates that into the climate arena. So I think that's very powerful, and I hope that the discussion has helped spark some thinking of how you also can go and, speak with your delegations and make sure that they're, seeing that, I see a lot of times you speak to countries and the ones that are working on extreme heat, they're not thinking at all about cooling. There's just no connection at all. So it's even though it's all connected maybe for us in this room, I don't think that it's always connected naturally, So I don't know, I just wanted to echo what you were saying, and thank you. I don't know if you would like to give any reactions to the inputs. No? Okay. Are there any other flags raised? Any other inputs? Oh, great. I'm really happy to hear from you, Iraq.
Actually, we have something in the markets that's called incentive. So we need incentive beside NDC. We are working on mitigation work program on Article 6. So people want to invest and find a place to invest in their carbon markets and to not just justify their NDC, but there is a next step to move of investment and Article 6 markets. So that will be a great opportunity to continue our guidelines and move to another window for private sector investment. Thank you.
Thank you, and I heard actually from my colleagues from GIZ today how they're actually working on applying Article 6 in several countries for cooling. So, feel free to speak with the colleagues on how they've actually applied it, because I think it's a very interesting point that you've raised about applying Article 6 to this space, and a new innovative area, one that we need to share, exchange on. Any other, oh great, Ubuho, yes, from Nigeria.
Ms. Lily, thank you. So for me, I really admire the way the Brazil and both of them like their response to your questions. So for me, when I look at cooling as a service, I think cooling as a service is being underestimated. I don't know, because cooling itself is cross-cutting. There is no sector of the economy that you wouldn't see cooling. Agriculture, not just the cash crops or what, even the aquaculture makes use of cooling, all right, in ensuring that the food that is being produced mostly is preserved. Even when you're talking about education, the last time I told you guys when you're conducting this assessment for Nigeria, I said, in up north, there is a state called the Adamawa State. I met a driver in the up north where he said students, actually, because of his stress, most of them had issues mentally. I think that was in 2023 when I had this assessment this with your secretariat. And also the industry, most products that are being produced are being preserved to use cooling, It's just cross-cutting, but when it comes to our NDCs, I don't know why we cannot just, I don't know if we really need to cajole the political space. We really need this political buy-in to ensure that we amplify this particular topic, all right? Because in Nigeria, I think cooling only appeared in NDC 2.0. It only appeared under IPPU. We just came in as a project. We need to ensure that for NDC 3.0, it's cross-cutting. We integrate it in each of these sectors. I think with the GCP team, we can push it. With the ministerial roundtable, we can push it. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Just one quick word on this. Thank you for pointing it out, the cross-cutting nature of cooling, and for agriculture and health. If you just take these two sectors, the food waste and the food loss that is associated in rural areas with long transport, in trucks where the agricultural produce just doesn't survive, let's say, it's a long journey to the marketplace, is significant. The percentages are significant. Same as in the health sector, to get vaccination into rural areas, to the villages, the cold chain that needs to maintain for many of these vaccines, that cannot be guaranteed because there is a tremendous lack of lorries and vehicles basically that could maintain the cold chain to deliver those vaccines. So it touches upon, when we talk about cooling and equipment, and it touches upon so many sectors, and that is why I think we feel that there is a momentum here in this cool coalition that we are building. There's a momentum because of its relevance to social, economic, and then mitigation, adaptation. It's a prism almost of many of the other things, and they come together when we say cooling.
Yes, very powerful last words. And that blessing can also be a non-blessing, because that's what can create fragmentation. But that we're coming together and bringing it together is the most powerful thing. And I hope that Martin's words gives you some ideas of how to, and Adalberto's interventions gives you ideas of how to actually take forward cooling as you just said, whether it's through adaptation work program or, you know, the global goals on adaptation or the finance, looking at health, food systems, development, adaptation, mitigation, depending on your country's priorities. Hopefully we've left you with some thoughts in this panel that helps you, equips you for the next 2 weeks. And thank you so much to the panelists.